what are we expected to do and how are we expected to do it? And if that's the case, then the new case law needs to be established, and we got to set new ground rules.
Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore what it means to find common ground at a time when it feels increasingly harder to do so, to listen more than we speak so that we can understand that our differences don't have to divide us. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before, so that you can then take that new knowledge and apply it to your ability to empathize with the people around you. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we truly reveal what connects us as humans. Our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and who we truly are. There are few more polarizing issues rocking our society right now than policing in the United States. It's one of the most emotionally charged conversations at scale that many of us have ever witnessed. Finding common ground seems improbable, if not impossible. Because if you take the abolish or defund the police advocates and place them across from the protect the blues supporters, the gap between what the two viewpoints appear to value most seems unbridgeable. But what if, at their core, the two sides are basically saying the same thing? What if underneath the emotions, the heated language, and the pithy slogans painted on signs and posted on social media, what if there's actually a lot of common ground? What if the advocates for systemic change looked across the gap and saw people who wanted to work within a system that helped them do their jobs better? What ramifications would that have on our ability to move forward? This episode is part 2 of an attempt to uncover exactly what that might look like. My guest this week is Anthony Shefferly, an active duty police officer. First and foremost, it must be said, I cannot imagine what the last year has been like for people like Anthony, the men and women in law enforcement. As you'll hear, it's kind of been a nightmare. And being that I am not a police officer myself or related to any, I simply don't understand the extent of the pressure, the fear, and the hurt they and their families are faced with these days. So that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to ask questions, to listen and see the person in front of you for who and what they are individually, and not as a caricature of a system you despise, or as an unquestioned hero. Just like my conversation last week with Nick Laparra, a staunch abolish the police advocate, there is so much nuance that surfaces when questions replace accusations and when lived experiences replace opinions. Please listen to this conversation with Anthony not with a cynical ear, but with an open mind and heart. And make sure you do the same with last week's conversation with Nick. I'll get the big question out of the way. What has the last year been like for you as a police officer, man?
Well, just to kind of reiterate what we talked about before we started, anything that I say is a representation of my opinions only and doesn't represent my agency or anything. And I clearly will not be using my agency's name or anything like that as we talk. But so to answer your question, the last year has been total and complete shit show for basically anybody in law enforcement. But and I've been no exception to that. That's for sure.
Why? What have you experienced? What has led you to describe it as exactly that, a shit show?
Well, basically a year to the day is when some of the most insane riots, for sure. Like a riot is not something that most police officers will ever really be a part of. And over the last year, it has been basically become commonplace. And it's not like it's so funny. You see, like, you go down and you experience it, and then you see on the news like mostly peaceful protests, and it's like, okay, this is a full blown riot. You know what I mean? Like, those things are clearly different, and they're finally now starting to like actually define and differentiate. Like, hey, this is a peaceful protest. This is a riot. Like, Florida's finally doing a good job coming out and defining it and showing what it looks like. But until you've been involved in it, it is hard to quantify like the intensity of what's going on. So it's some of the most stressful events that you ever have on the job, for sure. So that's been part of it, right? Was it kind of kicked off a year ago with all the riots, with the intense violence, and we had cops getting killed and that kind of stuff. And if you're old enough, you've seen things like this happen with cops before. It kind of like it flows, it ebbs and flows, right? So we saw it in the 90s with the LA riots, and then it kind of shifted back towards like a pro law enforcement type feel as you got closer to 9/11, and then after 9/11, there was such a magnitude of officers that were killed, along with the fire department, that all of a sudden the cops are heroes again, and now we're becoming the villains again. So it kind of ebbs and flows. But the difference to me is like, after the violence, kind of subsides in most places like Oregon, and out west in New York and stuff, like, they're still having massive issues with riots and violent protests, if you want to call them that. But for the most part, things settle down, but the sentiment hasn't changed. The rhetoric hasn't changed, and it gets very stressful when you see shootings and police action, uses of force that have been defined by not only society, but case law, policy, procedure, the Constitution, as justifiable, police action shootings. And now it's like, okay, well, things that we used to do as of less than a year ago were okay, and now all of a sudden they're not. Now all of a sudden the officers are being arrested for doing things that a year ago, all of those things that I just listed were like basically put you in the playing field as like, yes, like, this is acceptable, how to do this job this way. And now that's completely upside down. So now we have officers, and I'm speaking for myself a little bit, but this is like all the people that I know are really feel the same way. So we don't know what the rules are of this whole thing. We used to understand that, Graham v. Connor, Tennessee versus Garner, are the case law that rules us as far as use of force. And now nobody seems to care, and it doesn't really matter. And that the social media is going to actually be the judge of what we do, not the Supreme Court and not case law that we've been taught. So as much as the rules haven't officially changed, like the shooting in Atlanta, that is a completely justifiable use of force. And now all of a sudden that cop is arrested, and it just is like, it creates so much confusion as to like what we're allowed to do and how we're supposed to respond. And those questions really need to get answered before there's going to be any reduction of stress on the job. So basically you go to work and you just hope to God more than you did before. Like, man, I hope I don't get involved in some lethal use of force or some very intense use of force issue, because I know it's going to be, you're one social media video away from being the next political target, and you can't go to work like that on a day-to-day basis. It's just insanely stressful, to put it mildly. So it's kind of where we're at.
Look, I am not so naive that I believe if we just talk things out and listen, that things will wrap up like a fairy tale where everyone lives happily ever after. I understand there are significant differences and beliefs on this issue, or any other emotionally charged issue for that matter, that people are never going to agree on. My whole point is we can either continue to bludgeon each other with our overly simplified arguments, or we can have emotionally mature conversations that actually stand to bring about significant change for everyone involved. Because I know this, when we use our opinions like battering rams, we make matters worse. And no one wants things to get worse. I truly believe that is common ground we can all get behind. We've got an opportunity to make things better, but it's going to take sitting in some discomfort first to find exactly how to do it. Anthony, those cases that you just mentioned as case law, and I failed to write them down, so I can't repeat them. I'm hoping you can. What do those entail? Can you just high level walk me through what you're describing there when you describe those two cases?
Yeah. So what we're talking about now is police action use of force. And, I'm not like a schooled expert on it. I've been through the base training and I've been on the job for, close to 14 years. And I've been on a SWAT team and I've done a lot in my time as being a police officer. So that's my expertise. Right. But I'm not like an academy certified person when it comes to this stuff. So basically, well, let me back up just a little bit. So here's the thing, like you need to understand about police using force, is that everybody is very concerned because, well, that didn't look good, or that this didn't appear to be good, or that just looks bad. And when you're talking about violence, and then this could lead to a whole nother conversation of human violence and human behavior in general. But violence between two people or three people or eight people or war, up to and including that, never looks good. There's no way that you can make a police action shooting look like, yep, that was clean. That was a good one right there. Like nobody ever says that. You just had to shoot somebody and maybe kill somebody. There's no way to make that look like a movie. If you see somebody shot and killed in real life, it looks bad. It looks terrible. It looks disgusting. It looks horrible. And there's no way to make that look good. So when you're talking about like looking at police action, then you have to take the emotion out of it. Otherwise, it just all looks bad, and there's no way to justify it because it's horrible. It's human violence. It's bad, right? We try not to do that in civilized society, but it doesn't change the fact that violence will always be around, right? So now, how do you establish like working regulations within that context? And what we have here in the United States is basically like two Supreme Court cases, Graham versus Connor and Tennessee versus Garner. And Graham versus Connor is the first one that establishes objective reasonableness for the officers, right? What would a reasonable officer do under this circumstance? And it tells you basically like you can't armchair quarterback this guy from tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like he has to take action right now on what he knows right now. And it doesn't matter if like, hey, that guy had a heart condition, you should have known that. Or this dude just took a lethal dose of heroin, you should have known that. Like you can't judge the officer based on that because he had no idea that was the case, right? He's taking action on what he sees now based on like the comments from dispatch or witnesses on scene or, other officers showing up, or maybe he's the first one there and he sees that like he's taking action in fractions of seconds based on what he's seeing and observing. And you can't tell him like, oh, hey, like you should have known this. Like, would a reasonable officer say that? Then that's the standard that we need to be judged on. So that's Graham versus Connor. Tennessee versus Garner is the case of I'm trying to remember my exact case law here, but that is basically Fourth Amendment like seizures of another person, and that includes using deadly force or using lethal force. That's a seizure of another person's life, and when you can and can't do that. So I believe it's like a forcible fleeing felon. When you can shoot people and when you can't, in a sense. Like shooting people in the back. Like, should you ever shoot people in the back? Well, yeah, there's a time and place for it. And Tennessee versus Garner lays some of that out. So that those two cases are major for establishing and understanding use of force. Like that's like scratching the surface, right there. But if you understand those cases and what they say and what they mean, then you can start to unravel like, all right, I understand why an officer did this or why it went here or but you can't do it without that context. And I don't think people know that. I think there's a lot of ignorance to that, where people are just like, oh, I think cops can just go and do whatever they want. And they just beat the shit out of people for no reason. And it's like, no, we actually have a very strict set of guidelines that we have to operate inside of. And most officers do an amazing job of operating in that, except for now when we don't know what the rules are. We don't know that, like, does Tennessee versus Garner still hold? Does Graham v. Connor still hold? Are we being judged from a different, not the objective reasonable officer anymore? Is this a different standard? If it is, you need to establish case law and tell us. So then we can decide if we want to do this job still or not,
What's missing there? Like, where does that direction come from? You just mentioned case law. Is it a court case? Like I'm hearing that you are a little bit like a boat adrift at sea right now, or you may be feeling that way. Where does that direction come from, and what direction actually is missing? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, kind of. I think it comes from society. It comes from like, what are we expected to do and how are we expected to do it? And if that's the case, then the new case law needs to be established, and we got to set new ground rules. The term, like, and I despise this. I think it's a ridiculous concept, but reimagined policing. Well, okay, that's fine. Then if that's what everybody wants, then this is where, as law enforcement officers, we need to listen and say, hey, it used to be that lethal force was justifiable when you saw another person being stabbed, right? You could shoot the person stabbing the person that's committing the murder. You can shoot that person to stop them from killing another person, right? So if that's not the case anymore, and you don't want cops to do that, speaking as a society, then just tell us, establish the case law and say this is no longer allowed. And then we will act accordingly, or we'll quit, one of the two. You know what I mean? But that really needs to be established. Like, do you want the police to do this? Yes or no? Do you want them to respond to a knife attack? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, then you have to know, okay, how do we want them to do that? And we already have these things set out. It's not like these questions have never been answered. That's why there's stacks and stacks and stacks of case law. But I think that a lot of it is people don't know that it exists. They don't ever get taught it, you hear a lot about like the talk that people have about their kids and the police, like regardless of what race you are. There's a lot of people that do that. My parents did that with me. But what also needs to be part of that is understanding this is what the police are allowed to do and not allowed to do based on this, and this. And if you don't understand those laws, then you always think that the police are out violating everybody's rights. Well, it's like, really, you don't know what your rights are. And you have no idea where they come from and no idea what kind of, like, everything that's gone into that. So then you either give up all your rights and you don't understand anything, or you fight tooth and nail against stuff that is not your right, So there's, I don't know if that comes with like, hey, you need to be a better citizen, or if like schools need to have basic civics classes where you learn these things. Like, these are all things that might help. I don't know. But yeah, if you don't understand case law and you don't understand that, like we served several warrants today on our SWAT team. If you don't understand that we had a right and a signed warrant to kick your door in and take you to jail, then you're going to think that your rights are being violated, and they're not, So it's, again, there's a certain level of ignorance that exists about what the police can and can't do. And everybody wants to be a street lawyer. And then that's when things fall apart.
You mentioned early on, kind of at the onset, that the vast majority of police officers aren't going to experience a riot. And you made the distinction between a protest, a peaceful protest, and a riot. Is there a lack? Like, are police officers prepared for what we're experiencing right now? Is there something there needed
for cops, like to help them?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's a lot that could be added to help police right now. A lot of it, and obviously, like we've talked before, I see things through a big lens of fitness, wellness, and strength, right? So if you can make yourself more fit, more, you can make your life like better in general, then you're more equipped to deal with the stresses, right? So think of it like the diathesis stress model. Like everybody's got a breaking point, and right now with the increased stress and anxiety on the job, like if you have a more robust capacity to buffer stress, then you're going to make better decisions for longer, And if you don't, then you're going to have, you're going to be more prone to breakdowns, PTSD, inappropriate comments. Like, you're going to look like you're one of the bad cops. And really, like bad cops are a real thing, but it's not like there's bad apples, quote unquote, everywhere. Like, oh, the bad apples. Well, the bad apples, to be honest, and not to say there's not psychopaths out there, because they are, but those are even fewer and far between. But the bad apples that people talk about as police officers are usually just poor decision makers under stress. So then you do something stupid. It's like, well, why'd you do that? Well, I didn't know what else to do, or I just froze, and then you look like you're like a murderer or like a terrible person. It's like, no, that guy just made a bad decision. And, and nothing occurs in a vacuum. I was talking about this the other day. I got a lot of good feedback from it, but so you take, just from a decision-making standpoint, you take an officer and you put him in extreme stress in a very short period of time, right? Most of the especially the deadly force encounters that we deal with are 3 to 5 seconds. That's the average. 3 to 5 seconds, it's over. You're dead, or somebody else is dead, or, something bad happened in that 3 to 5 seconds. It's like the most stress you can experience in the shortest amount of time, right? And then you take another human being who is equally in the same sympathetic state, and they're going through the same exact thing, and neither one of them are physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually prepared to deal with it. Now, what did you think was going to happen here in this context? Did you think anything good was going to happen? No, absolutely not. So then you take two people like that in that state, and you put them in a traffic stop together, where maybe it's not a deadly force situation, but you're still getting the same interaction and you're still getting the same sympathetic response. Like, nobody's going to make a good decision. The cop's not going to make a good decision in what he says and what he does. And the driver of the car that doesn't want to get out of the car is preparing for a fight too. So now you've got two people that are in emotional, sympathetic states, have no ability to manage or control their emotions or their state. And now you want them to like figure out a way to work through this together. Like, that's insane to expect that. So I think in a lot of ways, the expectations of everyone are completely skewed.
And for the listeners, when you say sympathetic, you're not meaning sympathy. You're talking from the body's makeup of the parasympathetic versus the sympathetic. The sympathetic being that fight or flight response. So I want to make that clear to everyone.
Yeah. So sympathetic, like just kind of back it up a little bit. Like your physiology, like your sympathetic, fight, flight, or freeze. Those are your options. When you get into something intense, like let's say I don't know, like you almost get hit by a car. Right. Your body goes immediately into that shift. You feel that pins and needles feeling all over your body. Mm-hmm. Like some people call it an adrenaline dump. And there is some hormonal response, obviously cortisol, adrenaline, that kind of stuff. But the easiest term is sympathetic. Right. So you can't take your physiology out of this conversation and just say, well, he should have done something different. It's like sometimes your physiology is going to dictate something totally different and you don't have control over it. And heart rate, fine motor skills, gross motor skills, ability to communicate, breath rate, like those are all things that tend to go out the window when you get into a serious fight or flight response, a serious sympathetic response. So, and that's all stress response and stress management. So how you have the ability to buffer that stress will dictate a lot as to how you can respond and or can't respond. And you can watch like a multitude of dash cams. Every time you open up social media, you see 6 more dash cams of stuff cops should or shouldn't do, right? So it's really, really good to have that information out there and have that available to people, I think. But you also need to know how to watch it, because it's like watching a football game. If you don't know anything about football strategy, you could look at an offensive line and say, well, they suck. It's like, no, that guy just missed his down block, and the guy was the back was supposed to cut here. So if you don't understand any of that, you just look at it like again, slightly ignorant, and you, of course, it's not going to look good. Like, okay, it was just like football. Like, it was a blown play. Like, why did that play get blown up? Well, they just suck. Well, no, they just missed one block. So this cop's just a bad apple. No, he just needs to buffer his stress and do this and this, or that citizen on that traffic stop should have taken a breath instead of yelling profanity. Like, maybe that was all it would have taken.
With that in mind, Anthony, and I know this is solely from your perspective, the question I have is, should we be asking the same person in uniform to be the one to respond to a traffic stop versus a mental health distress situation versus a domestic violence disturbance versus an active shooter situation? Should that person be the same in each one of those instances?
I don't know. I don't think you can answer that question. So basically, you're asking, should social workers be involved in this context? Should we take some of the responsibility away from police officers? Like, are we equipped to deal with all of the shit that's being piled on us?
That's what I ask, because that question is in the ethos, right?
yeah, absolutely. And that's so this is where as cops, we got to listen, right? We got to listen, because it gets real easy to say, well, you're going to have a social worker go deal with this violent, mentally ill person that's got a knife. Like, good luck with that. And it's like, okay, well, maybe it is better. Like St. Petersburg last year said that we're no longer going to have our officers respond to mentally ill, suicidal people. They're not going to do that. And it's like, okay, well, that's fine. See, maybe it's better. Maybe that is the right choice. Now, I can see from being in this field a while that's going to come with consequences. That's going to come with a certain set of consequences from this action, right? But maybe it's better. Maybe that's the way we should be going. But you're not going to know unless you try. And really, if you want to have me do less work, like, that's okay. I'm okay trying that out. But just to put it, like, just an example, right? So let's say, police officers are no longer going to go to nonviolent runs, right? So that's the thing that I've heard a lot in the last year. Police officers shouldn't be going to nonviolent runs. Like, all right, well, you don't know when a run's going to become violent, right? So you're going to have another set of people, government paid employees. Which, side note, typically adding more government employees really isn't the answer to anything, in my experience. But anyway, so you're going to have another set of people that are going to go to these nonviolent runs, and you don't know when they're going to become violent. And you're going to have, at some point, who knows how often or when, but you're going to have some of these social workers that are going to get physically hurt or killed because they're not prepared to deal with violence if and when it were to occur. And then if they are prepared, then you're really going to have cops responding in a different uniform anyway. So it's like, okay, that's going to be a fallout, right? And then additionally, if you're only going to have officers, respond to violent runs, right? What's the adage? When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So now you're only going to have cops that are going to respond to violence. So do you think your cops are going to be more or less violent, right? You're going to have some stormtrooping cops out there that are just smashing everything, because that's the only thing we deal with. When I go to a run, I know there's going to be violence. So I'm going to show up and I'm going to bring violence to stop it so I don't get hurt. So that's going to be a consequence. You're not going to have community policing anymore. It's going to go away. You're going to have a bunch of ultra violent cops, right? And if you think what we have now is violent, like, I can guarantee you that would be a consequence. Like, they would probably 10x at least, So should they be the same? I don't know. It's worth some experimenting. But you have to understand that from a big picture standpoint, it's going to have a set of consequences one way or the other. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No,
or not.
I appreciate the perspective, man. The you made the comment kind of in passing that you hate the phrase reimagine the police or reimagine police work. I'm interested. Let's take it up a notch. What do you feel? What do you sense when you hear the even more inflammatory things like abolish the police, defund the police? What hits you there?
All right. So my school background, I have a master's in psychology and an undergrad in psychology and sociology. So immediately when I hear that, I think of things from a sociological theory standpoint. Like, okay, so you want to abolish the police, like you want me not to have a job anymore. So then I start thinking, number one, all right, where else am I going to go to work? Right. So that's my first one, is like, how am I going to take care of what I need to take care of financially if I'm not going to have a job, if everybody's going to be fired? Right. But from a theoretical standpoint, from a sociological theory standpoint, you have to look at it and say, okay, all right, so you're going to abolish police, right? And like I said before, human violence is something that's not going to go away just because you want it to. If that were the case, it would already happened, right? So if you eliminate the job of local law enforcement, that creates a power void, right? And with a void in power, like, again, that's not going to be something that people are just like, oh, hey, cool, they're gone and we don't need anybody to take this spot. Like, power will always be seized. That's human behavior, right? So that power void will be taken by someone. And if you're not going to have a group of local police officers that live in the community, that went through a hiring process to work in their community, that are literally your neighbors, right? They might not be your direct neighbor, but they live in the same town. They pay the same taxes, right? That are committed to making this place better, believe it or not, then who are you going to get, right? Who's next? And I can tell you, based on the history of the world, that what you're looking at is like right now, capitalism has this as our police force, right? This is how, state, local, federal law enforcement is laid out, is the system we have. And that's like a capitalistic view. So what you're shifting to, like it or not, like this is not like a debate as to which system is better, but you're shifting to more of a socialist view, right? So you're shifting more towards socialism from capitalism. And with that, you just need to look at the other countries that are socialist and say, this is probably what's coming next, right? So at best, you're talking like Canada, where Canada, you sign up for their national police force, which is not federal law enforcement, it's different, right? And then they place you kind of like military, where you might bid for duty stations and stuff like that. Now, I don't know if that's exactly how they do it, but that's typically like you'll have a national police force, right? And like at best, you're talking like Canada, Australia, like places like that. But at worst, I mean, you're talking like, look at the previous socialist-based countries throughout the history of the world, and they typically don't have a good track record with their police force, like being like more inclusive and less violent, honestly. Like Germany, 1940s is the first one that comes to mind. Like they were like the SS was a national police force, and is like, okay, is this where you want to go? Like, is this what you want to do? You want to eliminate like the case law that we have and then restart it with some national police force with totally different set of rules and standards? I don't know that that's a great idea. But like, you want to talk about abolish the police, like that to me, or, even the term defund, is really just another way to say that. So it's like, okay, well, if you think that getting rid of the police is going to fix the problem, like who do you think is going to come next? Again, you got to see beyond, like see the forest from the trees here, and I can tell you, this is just conjecture based on human history and human behavior, that the people that come after the system we have now are probably not going to be better. So just kind of think about it, I guess.
The example that comes to mind when you have that gap of local law enforcement that has signed up for a job, I look at the situation in Mexico where there are those gaps of local law enforcement, and the people that fill the gaps, to use your word, are the drug cartels. They are the local the local enforcement. I won't call them law enforcement. And there's a lot of corruption at the federal level in the federal police force as well. The counter to that, Anthony, is you did bring up some countries that have, much more of a, however you want to term it, a stricter gun policy or a different way of looking at the police force. You have countries in Europe that don't arm their every police officer. When you point to those examples, what makes the United States different? Why are those not examples that we can say, perhaps we could model off of that?
I would initially say volume, right? Well, let me just say, like, I don't know a lot about that, right? Sure. I know enough to like speak very, very, like, again, like slightly ignorantly maybe, of like, current socialist countries' models of police work, so the way I understand it, and this, again, like, I would have to really check some numbers on this, so maybe I shouldn't even say anything, but it seems to me that it's a volume issue. Like, there's less people, there's less firearms, there's less chances of the police being shot, so I guess I really don't know. But again, you just have to look at and say, like, what do we really want to happen here? Do we want to move to a more socialist based society? And if the answer is yes, then I don't know, man. Like, I am not for that. I don't think that's a great idea. But I'm one little cop here. That's my opinion. So it really doesn't matter,
Yeah.
So, I can just see more downsides to that as a whole, rather than pros. And then, a lot of it, I think, is based on the Constitution that we have and the way it's written. And in the fact that there is a Second Amendment here that a lot of countries don't have. And, so I would say that's a big part of it.
I appreciate the I don't know answer, right? That's as good of an answer as any, man. I appreciate
I'm not going to be like the media and just make crap up and say it's true. Like, oh yeah, I know the answer to that. I don't know. I haven't done a lot of research on it.
Now you're fanning the flames a little bit there, buddy. Another pointed question then. Is the system of police work in the United States in need of change, overhaul, reform, whatever you want to throw in there? Are there changes needed?
There's always changes needed, right? There is always a way to assess and make things better. But that doesn't mean that you throw the baby out with bathwater and burn the whole system down either, right? So to say that there are no changes, to say that there is no racism, to say there are no laws on the books that target, like, or seem to target specific communities would be wrong, right? There are. And there are always ways to make things better, take laws off the books, change things, improve things, right? But you don't burn the whole system down and start over, right? That's not how it works. That's not true. What that is an effort for people to twist things and seize power for themselves. That's always the way it is. That's human history. That's world history. But yeah. And really, I think people kind of miss the point too of, like, this is not a just police issue. This is a system-wide issue. And who else is involved in this? That's what blows my mind, is like, everybody's focused on us, the police. Like, look at the police for what we are. We are an entry point to the criminal justice system. Like, we are your first point of contact. That's it. Right. And once we take you to jail, then you are in the system. And who else is involved in the system? Lawyers, judges, the court system, probation officers. Like, no one's talking about them, and this is not me trying to shift blame, because, like, we should take responsibility for what we need to make our profession better and more professional, for sure. Right. But, like, you want to talk about where the laws are created. Like, look at your Congress, look at the legislature, like, look at those people and say, why are these laws even in existence? Why are the crack laws so much more of a hammer than the powder cocaine? and that's a big one that's always been, said of being like clearly racist, right? Clearly this disproportionately affects, different communities in different ways, right? That, and you can make an argument for that for sure, but I don't make the law as a police officer. I just enforce it, what's on the books. You know what I mean? And that, so change it. And it's not like it hurts my feelings one way or another. Like if you took that all away and made that all made every drug legal, let's say, right? Like Oregon's doing, I think, like decriminalize all of it. I'm not going to lose a bit of sleep over it. You know what I mean? It's not like the police have some vested interest in like keeping the laws the same so that they can continue to be oppressive. Like if they're oppressive, change them. Like we'll do our jobs, just again, like I said earlier, tell us what you want us to do and we'll go do it, So are there some system changes that should happen? Yeah, but it needs to occur up and down the chain. And you need to look at the lawyers, you need to look at the judges, you need to look at Congress, and you need to look at all that. Like, why are these laws even being created like this? Who creates these laws? And why are they still on the books? Oh, you mean you elected the people to do that? Okay, well, those are the people that need to be looked at. And you want to talk about stuff like qualified immunity, which isn't what everybody thinks it is with law enforcement. But then you look up the chain at the immunity that the prosecutors have, and it's way more than what cops have. And you look at the immunity, the total immunity that judges have, and Congress, like they have almost full immunity, as where we have qualified immunity if we're acting under the color of law, right? That we can't be sued civilly. Like that's basically it, which is really small when you start looking up the chain and you're like, wait, I can't sue a judge for anything ever at all. Right. That's pretty big. Now, how are those judges getting in place? Now, what kind of sentences are they putting out? Like, those are the things that need to be looked at as well. And again, I'm not trying to shift blame away from law enforcement. There's only so much that even if you let's say you did abolish the police, like what's that going to change about the rest of the system? Nothing. Right. So then you're going to have a different group of people, maybe in different uniforms with slightly different rules and the same problems, but worse. So again, like look at the big picture. Everyone is so emotional right now, and that nobody really has the ability to detach and say, okay, what do things really look like, and how can we actually create change here?
Anthony, I got to ask the question: how do we find common ground? What is the common ground from your vantage point that we can say this is where we stand? And now let's build from here. Can you pinpoint anything?
The less emotional you can be, the better, right? So, people are certain groups of people are clearly benefiting from distress in this country, right? So how can you understand that your emotions are being used to polarize, right? So if we can step back from our emotions and then to go along with that, actually listen to people on both sides, right? So like as a cop, if I'm not willing to hear somebody's complaint, then shame on me. You know what I mean? But as a citizen, if you're not willing to hear what I go through every day on the job and the amount of insults and physical batteries and the amount of the toll emotionally that this job takes on you. Like I was listening to a guy today talk about he did CPR on a 10-year-old who hung herself. Right. She was dead. Right. So if you don't know that that's the kind of stuff that we see every day, sometimes several times a day, then, and you don't appreciate that's what we do, so that you don't have to basically so you don't have to go and deal with that. Like I will do this job. Right. For whatever reason, like you can outsource that stuff to me. And I'll take it on my shoulders and I'll deal with it. But if you don't want to hear that because you just think I'm an oppressive, you don't see me as a human, then that's not going to get anywhere either. So if people are not going to have an honest two-way conversation, then that we're going to be stuck in this karmic cul-de-sac until the end of time,
As the escalation of the last year and a half has occurred, I'm interested, Anthony, and I'd love to hear from you. Like, is there a situation or a moment that stands out to you of those instances where you have felt the pressure, where you have felt the the disrespect, is there a moment that comes to mind that you can point back to and say, look, this is what it's like?
I don't know. Like, if I can describe like how it feels to, to the average person, I guess, is that what you're asking?
I'm saying, like, has someone said something to you in the last year, or, have you had something thrown at you, or, I'm not trying to fan the flames here, but I just want to get an understanding of truly what the last year has been like for you.
Well, I guess if like the most impactful, like one of the most impactful things of the last year was, when the riots kicked off, just the the physical danger was real. Like we were getting, like we had in town here. And again, I'm not going to say my town, but we had one of our state troopers was actually hit with a homemade bomb. And he, he's probably not working anymore. Right. And we don't hear, you don't hear about that. Like, oh, that happened there of all places, but so that was very real. But also, like, I'm standing there on the line and I'm being yelled at, oh, like you just beat your kids. Like you beat your children. And I'm like, why in the hell would anybody start saying things like this, amongst many, many, many other things, and profanities and, racial slurs and you name it. Like, but that one for some reason, like you really think like, and all the nonsense stats of like, X amount of police officers beat their wives and this percentage of police officers beat their children. And then you get accused of beating your children. Like, are you insane? Like, so that it's infuriating, but it's meant to infuriate. You know what I mean? So you just got to understand that. I guess I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Yeah, it does. Why did you get into this work?
Everybody's got a different reason. If you want to have a cool conversation with a cop, you really get to the roots of like why they became a cop, right? Because it's really not like, oh, I did it for the money. That's for sure. So September 11th, I was a sophomore in college, and I saw those towers hit, and I knew that my uncle worked there, but I wasn't sure exactly where. But my uncle was killed in the South Tower on September 11th. And I was like, yeah, I think I know the direction I want to go. Right. So I want to go into the military or maybe law enforcement, but I was playing college football at the time. So I totally chickened out and didn't join the military, but because I had other stuff going on or whatever, excuse I wanted to make at the time. But I ended up going in this direction, and here we are now. So that's why.
What motivates you to go out the door every day? As crazy as things have been, certainly over the last year, what fuels the motivation to do it day in and day out still to this day?
Well, some people are more equipped to deal with certain things, right? Some people are more apt to be really good at math, right? Or, and then maybe they become an architect, right? Some people are more geared towards being able to manage stress and being able to make good decisions and the desire to be involved in the chaos so that you can actually change things for the better, right? So I think I'm one of those people that is more equipped to deal with stress at a different level. And I have a responsibility to go out and take care of this, as long as society wants to outsource this again, right? If you want to outsource these things to this group of people, meaning the police, then I am physically and emotionally equipped to deal with it at a level that, maybe other people aren't. So I'll take it. I'll do this as a profession, and I can get a paycheck for it. And I'll take that. I'll take that burden, if you will, because I'm good at it. And I think I can do a good job at it, and I can continue to do a good job at it. So I guess that's more or less.
What's a question that you wish you were asked more?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe like, how are you doing? Like, that would really be impactful. Like, if a citizen, somebody that was like, hey, how are you doing? Like, not like, hi, how are you? But like, really like, hey, how's it going? Like, you doing okay? That kind of stuff. Like, we actually, like, I've actually gotten that more in the last year. Like, hey, it's one thing to be like, hey, good job. We support you. But it's another thing to be like, you guys are really getting shit on. Like, are you doing okay? And it's usually like old military vets or old cops that do that. But if you're looking at a cop, like, you honestly don't know like what kind of shit he just did 10 minutes earlier. You know what I mean? Like, it could have been a car wreck with a decapitated head in it. Right. Or it could have been, he's stuck on, running traffic on an intersection, just bored out of his mind. Like, you just don't know what he just did 10 minutes ago, a day ago. You have no clue. So to have random people just be like, hey, I wonder if he's doing okay. Like, that's a decent question. At least for me. Other guys, you might ask that too, and they might tell you to go screw yourself. So you just never know.
Well, I as a random citizen want to ask, man, how are you doing? How are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, the last year's been rough. It impacted everybody a little bit differently, but it's been difficult. But yeah, doing okay. Been better, been worse, but definitely been better. The job's a rough spot to be in, for everything that we just laid out. But yeah, it could always be worse.
Is there anything you feel I should have asked? And anything you came into this saying, I hope he asks about this, or that you want to make sure people know about the job you do, the role that you're in, the things that you're faced with?
No, man, I think we laid it out. I feel like I talked a lot. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, if you're going to judge people, if you're going to judge cops on uses of force, you got to understand what we laid out, and then you can start to enter the conversation and make sense, So other than that, I don't know. I think that's about it.
Well, man, that's where we'll leave it then. I thank you so much for doing this. I know this probably isn't super easy or maybe even something you wanted to do, but I appreciate you doing it and allowing me the chance to just poke at you for the last, hour, what have you. So thank you, Anthony. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for coming on here and sharing your story.
Yeah, right on, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
I posted on social media before these last two episodes dropped that I felt this was some of the most important work that I've ever done as a journalist, as a podcaster. I think these two conversations with Nick and with Anthony, if they are taken for what they are, a nuanced look at an incredibly heated issue, I think if we can listen to what both men said and begin to uncover the similarities and not always look for the differences, we begin to find, as I've said several times now, a way forward. Please listen to both episodes with an open mind, with an open heart. Listen to both episodes and find not what you want them to say, but what they actually are saying. Listen to that. And I think we've got something to work with here. So many thanks to Anthony for sharing his story on the show today. Please do me and Anthony a huge favor and share this episode with someone you know who might also find some value in listening to today's conversation. Share this episode and last week's episode with Nick Laparra and help spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions. And if you like the conversations with amazing guests like Anthony that I have on this show each and every week, be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. If you ever want to get in touch with me, you can always email me. It's michael@thefollowupquestion.com. I would love your feedback on these last two episodes. You can also go to thefollowupquestion.com and reach out there. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question. And until then, keep asking questions.